Mic testing, check 1, 2, 3. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this Face Pulse webinar series. My name is Vijay Anand. I'm Vice President at Face, and I've been hosting the Face Pulse platform for TPOs, faculties, and educational institutional leaders. Over the last year, we have created this channel on YouTube called Face Pulse. You can check out what we have been doing during the pandemic. And we took a small breather after the placement season was done, and we are now back at it again in trying to bring in some best practices, exchange ideas, and bring in external third-party insights on how to prepare our students better for the placement season. You can expect this to be a regular affair. At least once in every 2 weeks, we'll be doing these sessions, primarily for TPOs. If any students, we've been ensuring students are not part of this audience, but if by mistake any students are there in this audience, I request you to please log off because this session may not be too relevant for you. Today's session, I have with me Mr. Karthik Raja, who is also Vice President here at FACE, who takes care of training program delivery, most specifically focusing on technology products. So the title for today is planning training for the IT product recruitment for 2022 pass outs. Now, before I hand over the reins to Karthik to take you through this session, I am going to just share some insights on what we have been doing in terms of preparing students in this space. But before that, I just wanted to quickly flash an important information. We've been seeing some rumors floated around that FACE is downsized, FACE is only doing online, FACE is doing only retail business and things like that. We wanted to reassure everyone in the audience and the education leaders that we are the same company that we used to be, and we have the same impact across India and different educational institutions in the placement training space. So please rest assured that we are here to help you in any kind of training interventions that you seek for your students. I just wanted to use this opportunity to maybe flash some key contacts that in case you wish to contact us. My name is Vijay Anand. Here's my contact. Deepak, who's a zonal manager, Dinesh, Libin, and Praneeth, who are cluster managers. So you might have already interacted with some of them. In case you have any needs, please feel free to reach out to any of us. I'll again flash this towards the end of the presentation in case you want to take a screenshot. Now, in this session, I want to start by providing some context on the graduate recruitment space. Now, I primarily have been interacting with a lot of recruiters. In fact, we have brought in a couple of recruiters through our interventions and helped conduct recruitment drives across India and select candidates for training and then subsequent onboarding. We also regularly interact with HRs from different tech companies and tech product companies, tech startups. And the common theme that keeps coming up is that it is difficult to recruit graduate developers. One of the reasons why it's difficult to recruit developers is because there is not enough good graduate developers out there. Now, that seems to be a standard reply. But when we started digging deep, trying to understand the recruiter's problem, or let's say in case of a startup, the recruiter is often the founder, co-founder, or the leadership team himself or herself. Now, when we started interacting with these kind of people, we were able to drill down one level below the supply demand equation and then try to find out what are actually the problems. First is students are often encouraged to see IT jobs and IT product jobs as just jobs. Not enough insights are shared, not enough awareness is created about the opportunity that these jobs provide to grow in a career, to learn, to pick up skills that are in demand, etc. So this is a major problem that recruiters have highlighted. One of the ways in which this could be addressed is by alumni connect, external speakers, LinkedIn, or that a newsletter from the TPO cell. Multiple such interventions can help address this area. Some of these interventions can come from within the departments, computer science, IT, or related departments, which could share some insights on this to address this lack of interest in programming. The second area that recruiters have been highlighting as a problem is unrealistic expectations from the job. The candidate is, first of all, not that great. The candidate does not have a GitHub profile. The candidate comes in and expects to be doing development when I'm recruiting for a testing position, when I'm recruiting for an entry level testing position. If I'm recruiting for a development position, this candidate does not even qualify to get into a testing role, but seeks a development position. So there is an unrealistic expectation in terms of overestimating their own abilities or underestimating the demands of a particular job profile. Third thing is unrealistic expectations of onboarding training. Some students believe I'm smart enough, I'm reasonably smart. They're accurate about that understanding. They're reasonably smart in aptitude and communication, but they believe that is sufficient to get in and pick up something from scratch and be able to do the job using those skills in about a month or two. And they believe the company is supposed to give them onboarding training to get to that place. Now, 10 years ago, this was a reality. TCS, Infosys, all the big companies were spending so much on onboarding training. Now we have seen that as a trend come down drastically. There is a huge demand for directly deployable talent. If I recruit someone from a campus in India as a developer, I wish as a CTO or a HR to be able to place that person immediately on day one in a team and get that ball rolling. So that is an unreasonable expectation most candidates seem to have. The last problem that was highlighted was there is a lack of a business mindset. Some people are very good in coding, but when they're asked to understand the business mindset, especially in startup technology roles, they find that it is lacking. Now, how we address that is $1 million question. I have suggested some ways in which we can address number one, but I'm not, probably points number 2, 3, and 4. How do we address that is 4 different webinars topics themselves. So hopefully we'll come back with subsequent rounds of this webinar where we'll try to touch upon some of these areas. For want of time, I'm just going to quickly move on. Just focus on that first lack of interest area. Some of the questions that were asked and what recruiters felt was in the final interview, I am asking a candidate some questions such as, what tech blogs do you follow? What was the last article that on programming that you read? What programming book is your most favorite? What do you like about the framework you're working on? If you worked on multiple frameworks, can you compare the positives and negatives? If there is mute silence, then I know that this candidate has just done test prep for that particular role, prepared for the exam formats and patterns, and then failing miserably in the final round. There was a time when test prep alone was sufficient to get students placed, but now, especially in IT product roles, that is not working. We are realizing that as a test prep company. So we just want to share that insight with you, and I'm sure many of you already know this. Now, if you ask me, what is the main skill that's tested in product roles? Algorithmic thinking skills. Now, these skills are not complex. If a reasonably smart student with a 7.58 CGPA sets out to conquer algorithmic thinking skills, he or she would have to cover 20 to 25 algorithms, which covers 99% of the interview questions that most product companies test them in. And it's not going to take more than 1 or 2 weeks. In the interview or in the process of going through the recruitment, they are just tested on the ability to pattern match. Okay, if I'm given a problem, do I know which algorithm to use? Right. Second thing, if I were to compare which algorithm is better for this problem, let's say multiple algorithms can be used to solve a problem, which algorithm is better? Thirdly, adapting. What if I couldn't do it this way? What if is there another way to do it? What if there is a constraint? Will you be able to improvise and share your knowledge? Most of this is testing analytical skills. right? Even if algorithms are not used, my analytical skills come to the fore. So algorithmic thinking skills in IT product recruitment is quite crucial, but it's not too complex as many might project it to be. If a smart student sets out and if there is good guidance, I'm sure they can conquer it. Now, there's also a different route that we have observed in the last year, wherein smaller startup tech companies, so when we say product companies, we often think about Amazons and Googles and Facebooks. There's a lot of smaller tech companies which also recruit. It's a startup zone mode. Now, they may not even just test algorithm knowledge of algorithms. Questions that do not require algorithms, I can use that to check if someone can code or not. Most of them used a weekend project to evaluate students or evaluate potential recruits. They were given a small app over the weekend. They came back with the app. Then an interview happened. Why did you make this choice? Why did you design this flow this way? If I were to ask you to change it, how would you change it? Can you do it right away? Can you screen share? In a very manager reporty kind of a mode, these kind of interactions happen, and someone who could pull their weight in those interactions got the job offer. So this is what we have seen evolved in the last year in terms of IT product company recruitment. I will be sharing more towards the rest of the webinars, but in today's session, we're going to focus from the basics. What is IT product recruitment? And we're going to tell you how to plan your training calendar to help your 2022 pass outs. So we'll also be doing a Q&A for 10 minutes in the end. So I'm going to pass the reins to Karthik, who's heading the tech product training team. Over to you, Karthik.
Thank you, Vijay. A warm welcome to all members of the training and placement community for joining this session. So at the outset, I would want to quickly talk about the different technical rounds that are present when it comes to hiring by IT services as well as IT product companies. Now, MCQs is one way in which companies have been testing the conceptual understanding of students over a long period of time. This is something which IT service companies use to a larger extent, and to a certain extent, IT product companies also use it. In MCQs, either you have MCQs around concepts, or a particular program is given and students are either asked to predict the output or to find out the bugs in it. Now, the second more emerging pattern is around asking students to do a coding question, which is to test the problem solving ability of the students. Now, again, there's a huge difference between the type of coding questions that IT service companies ask and IT product companies ask. I think this is where the real difference lies in terms of cracking the first round and getting to the interview. I'll talk about this in more detail in the coming slides. Now, the other emerging trend that we have seen is companies are beginning to hire through certain kind of hands-on app building exercises, which is conducted in the form of hackathons, or like what Vijay mentioned as weekend projects. Yellow Messenger is one of the companies that we kind of help with campus hiring. And this year when they met us and we were designing the recruitment process, we started talking about the challenges that companies are facing, particularly during the times of COVID, where they were not able to go to campus and conduct their hiring rounds. So they also wanted candidates who can be quickly put on the job and who will have higher learning ability. So together we designed a task, which is a very simple chatbot building exercise. Students were given elementary training on how to go about approaching the problem. And then students had to build their own chatbots and they had to share it with the Yellow Messenger team. And they kind of analyzed it. They did an interview based on it. And based on that, offers were made. And some of these students have even started doing their internships at Yellow Messenger. And Yellow Messenger is super happy about those students because right from the day they start their internships, they're able to quickly learn and start getting into the group. Now, this is something that we see more and more companies adopting in the days to come. And once kind of students get their final interview, right, be it a hackathon or coding questions where problem solving ability is tested, subsequently students will have to do a interview. Now, earlier whiteboard interviews was something which was very popular among your IT product companies, where the ability of a student to think and how does he go about approaching a problem, etc., was being tested. Now, particularly interviews going online, CodeShare is a more popular way in which students are being tested here. So in CodeShare, very similar to whiteboard interview, this is a sample of a CodeShare interview. So what happens is there's a common screen which is being shared between the interviewer and the candidate. The problem statement is available on one side and the integrated development environment is on the other. And the student can go about solving the problem. And there are a lot of questions which are being posed by the interviewer, and depending on the approach that the student takes, right, the interview direction changes. Now, taking this one step further, ThoughtWorks does something called as a pair programming interview. Now, pair programming is something that a lot of you might have heard about as one of the agile software development methodologies. Now, we kind of found it a little interesting that pair programming, which is a development methodology, was being used as an interview technique. But then we are also involved with ThoughtWorks' onboarding training. Now, when we were doing that, that is when we were able to really appreciate the benefit of that. Because when that is a methodology which is being used when it comes to development, now students find it way more easier and a better fit because their communication skills and their ability to work in team and kind of program as a pair is already getting tested. So these kids kind of start to perform better on the job as soon as they are put in. So these are emerging interviewing techniques and students have to be familiar with it. Now, see, most of you would be familiar with the kind of skills that IT service companies have been testing. Naturally, our larger focus is in terms of preparing students for IT product companies. But then before we get into how do we get our students ready for IT product companies, I would like to spend a couple of minutes in terms of differentiating between IT product companies and IT service companies. I think it's important to understand the nature of these companies so that we will be able to appreciate why do they have a particular recruitment pattern and how do we prepare ourselves and our students for the same. See, basically IT service companies, the likes of Infosys, Wipro, Cognizance of the world, see, basically they build software solutions for their clients, and most of their clients are going to use these software solutions as internal office level solutions, right? And the number of people who are going to be using it is going to be very, very limited. You don't expect millions of users to use it. They're limited to a few hundred or a few thousand users. So which means the scale at which they operate is very, very small. But then every client of theirs has very specific requirements, right? So they're more oriented towards meeting their clients' requirements for each of the IT service which is being developed. So they do a lot of customization work, and in every case, they find the customer to be the king. So whatever customer wants, they'll have to do it. So that's the reason why you find a lot of coordination related roles also happening in the IT service company, but you'll never see that in a IT product company. See, IT product company, see, normally we also have this habit of thinking Google, Facebook, even the companies that I've put here as example are all the big names. See, these aren't the product companies, right? These alone are not the product companies. Rather, product company is any company which has got a product that it plans to sell. And most of these product companies expect a lot of users, a very, very high number of users to come and use their platform. See, whether that happens or not is a different story. But when they build their platforms, they always build it in such a way that it is optimized for very, very high number of users, right? So which means they expect high number of users, they expect high amount of data to be flowing through their platforms, and they want to be optimized for it, right? And they're only going to be building the platforms for their own products, right? So which means the team sizes are going to be relatively smaller, but of course that depending on the size of the organization that will vary. But then they're only going to be developing solutions for their own organizations, right? But they want the solutions to be extremely optimized, which means they want candidates who are nothing but the best. So they hire fewer number of candidates, but they expect candidates to be very, very strong, right? So now let's look at what kind of skills do these product companies expect. First is they want people with very strong problem solving skills. So see, earlier problem solving was tested largely through aptitude tests, but today problem solving is something which is getting tested through programming assessments, right? So like your HackerRank, HackerEarth, there are so many platforms which have evolved, and the ability of a student to solve a problem, code and implement it is something that gets tested. Now, see, today we all know that IT service companies also have a coding round. IT product companies also have a coding round. Now the difference is in terms of the size of data which has to be handled, right? When the size is very, very small, which is what IT service companies mostly test, coding for that is a very simple, straightforward program that they write. You don't have to be optimizing for the time complexity and the space complexity. See, very simply put, for the benefit of people who do not have a computer science background, time complexity is the amount of processing time that is going to be taken to run a particular program. And space complexity is the amount of space which is required to save the data required to run the program, right? So there are always going to be constraints in terms of the processing time available and the space available, right? So whatever solutions the student write has to be optimized for these two things. This is a fundamental difference between questions that are asked by IT service companies and IT product companies. IT service companies, values given are very small. You don't really have to optimize for time and space. As long as the program just runs, you're good to crack the interview. But when it comes to IT product companies, the data, the sheer volume of data which is being handled is enormously high, right? So whatever programs they write has to be optimized for time and space. Now, the other very important thing that companies expect is learnability. Like what we saw in the case of Hello Messenger, they're even going to the round of testing the students' ability to quickly learn and build a chatbot. This is something that we are increasingly seeing in a lot of recruiters. Now, learnability is something that you can test through hackathons. Companies are also testing it based on the development profile that students have, right? So if somebody has got a respectable GitHub profile and there are a lot of projects that they've put it, etc., that's a demonstration of the work that the student has done, as opposed to somebody who's never tried his hand at coding. And finally, in the interview, conceptual understanding, particularly in areas like operating systems, DBMS, networking, etc., get tested. See, a lot of students start focusing on interview before they really start preparing for their the first coding round. See, unless students are able to crack the coding round, right, and prove that they have good problem solving skills, they're not even going to get an interview call. So I think the primary focus has to be in terms of improving their problem solving skills and ensuring that they can crack the coding round. Now, to kind of just explain whatever I spoke now, I'm going to add a little bit more details. Particularly for people from the computer science department and computer science background, just to kind of make them, kind of give them more clarity, I've added this question. If you do not have a computer science background, it's fine. You can just kind of understand the broader thought of this. Now, this is one of the very, very, very simple questions. Similar questions have been asked by Flipkart in the past, right? So they're asking a student to print all the prime numbers up to n. Now, an example is also given where they're saying n value is 35. So the output will have numbers like 2, 3, 5, 7, etc. up to 31. So all the prime numbers up to 35 are printed. So normally any coding question which is given, they will give you a question and there is also an example given. See, for the purpose of illustration, I've taken a very, very, very simple, straightforward, easy question, which also does not run into a lot of lines. But typical questions that are asked by your IT product companies will be way more lengthier than this. Right? And they always give you an explanation of how is the input and output correlated. And this is the most important thing, constraints, which will be given to the student when he writes the program. Now, what is the constraint that they're saying? The value of n can be from 1 to 10 power 6, right? In the example, if you see, they've given a very, very small number, 35. So generating all prime numbers up to 35, however efficient, inefficient your code might be, it will very, very easily run in a fraction of a second. But then when you look at 1 to 10 power 6, now the dynamics will change. Now, why is it changing? Let's understand what is a prime number. I call a number as a prime number if it does not have any factors other than 1 and itself. So how do you check it? So for example, if I have to check whether 37 is a prime number or not, from 2 up to 37, I will check whether that number is divisible or not. So first I'll take 2, divide 37 by 2, no, it is not divisible. Then again I take 37 divided by 3. Then I take 37 divided by 4. Like this, I'll have to check for all values up to 36. If none of these numbers will be able to divide 37 perfectly, then I will say 37 is a prime number, right? Now I need to do this for all values up to 10 power 6, right? So after 37, if we go to 38, again I have to check for all values from 2 to 37. For 39, I have to check for all values from 2 to 38. So if I were to write this as a simple algorithm, I'm using a very naive approach to write it. So what will you do? First, you'll have to check for all numbers from 2 to n. For each number you take, you will check for divisibility from 2 to n minus 1. For example, like what we saw for 37, you check from 2 to 36. 38, you check from 2 to 37. Like this, each number you have to check up to 10 power 6. Now this means I am going to be running this loop n times into n times, right? The first n times I have to check for all numbers from 1 to 10 power 6. And when I'm checking for 10 power 6, whether that number is a prime number or not, I have to check again from 1 to 10 power 6 minus 1, all values, right? So this entire loop is going to run 2 times, right? 10 power 6 into 10 power 6. So people call this this as an algorithm with an order complexity of n square. So you call it as big O of n. It basically means nothing but how many times is your program going to run, which is used as a way of estimating what is going to be your processing time taken. Very roughly, if I assume one of these calculations to even take 1 nanosecond, which is ideally what it would take in a normal processor, a very basic one. This particular calculation would take you about 1000 seconds to run. Now, they give you a slightly optimized approach. Now, the approach is very simple. See, again, it comes to property of numbers. As far as computing goes, students will have to be familiar with properties of numbers. Now, any number which is a prime number will not have any factor from 1 to that number, right? But you don't have to check for 1 to that particular number. But if you check it only from 1 to root of that particular number itself, you can be sure whether it has a factor or not. Example can be 36. For example, to find out whether 36 is a prime number or not, I don't have to check all the way from 1 to 36. If I check only from 1 to root of 36, which is 1 to 6, it is enough. So any composite number, which is not a prime number, will have one factor between 1 and root of that number. So 36, for example, root of 36 is 6. Before 6 itself, you will have one of the factors. For example, 49, root of 49 is 7. So between 1 and 7 itself, you will have a factor. So 7 is a factor. So 49 is not a prime number. So this way, for all the numbers from 2 to n, I have to check. But I don't have to check the divisibility from 2 to that number. I just have to check from 2 to root n. And if it's not divisible, then I know it is a prime number and I can print it. Now, it looks like a very small modification to the question, right? But then what happens is, the first time I have to run for all numbers from 1 to 10 power 6. But when I check for divisibility, I don't have to do it up to 10 power 6. I only have to do it for root of n, right? So this will be a question with an order complexity of n root n, which is instead of 10 power 6 into 10 power 6, which was 10 power 12 earlier. Now it will just be 10 power 9. Now between 10 power 9 and 10 power 12, you're talking about a difference of 10 power 3 nanoseconds, right? That's a lot of additional time. Now this exactly is the optimization which an IT product company will expect the student to do. But then of course, this is not the most optimized program. There are better algorithmic techniques which you can use it. Now, we look at it and say, okay, this is one question, so what? When Vijay spoke about preparing, right? He mentioned that there are only about 25 odd programs, which is algorithmic techniques, which a student has to learn to kind of start his preparation for data structures and algorithms. See, basically, multiple recruiters have asked in the past. So if a student is able to understand the concepts that we spoke about now, apply them for questions, then he will definitely be in a position to crack a lot of questions, not just this question. Whatever application-based questions based on this concept come are also things that the student will definitely be able to solve. Right. Now let's talk about training plan. Okay, so if I want a student, I'm just quickly summarizing whatever we've discussed till now. So if I want a student to crack a IT product job, what should I do? I should be able to get the students problem solving skills to the level that recruiters expect. So what do I mean by problem solving skills? He should be able to write code for very large values of data that is optimized for space as well as time. That is the basic requirement. But straight away, a student cannot get there, right? See, let's also talk about this. When you talk about large amounts of data and this thing, an algorithmic technique which will help you run it faster, etc., you cannot use basic fundamentals of programming that you would have just learned. You will require higher level techniques also. But then even to get there, first the student has to be strong in fundamentals of programming, right? So what do we mean by fundamentals of programming? So when a student starts learning programming, forget what language, in any language that the student starts learning programming, these are the initial 4-5 items that he's going to learn. So operators is basically how do you do mathematical operations, decision making, right? As in, this is basically like, what if a particular condition is satisfied? Basically, you use this using your if else kind of conditions. Then iteration. So see, again, if something has to happen 100 times, 1000 times, or till a particular condition is met, etc., you use your for loops and while loops. That is what is covered under loop and control statements. Now, these are the three most important fundamental building blocks for anybody to start learning programming. Without these three things, there is absolutely no programming that anybody can learn. So student has to first learn these three things. Then obviously questions based on arrays and strings will require students to have strong understanding of operators, decision making, and looping statements. Now, once a student is able to cover these 5 topics, right, we can reasonably say that the student understands fundamentals of programming. Now, one question that I continuously keep getting is what is the programming language that the student should pick up? Very honestly, the programming language that the student should pick up really does not matter at all. What matters is only his ability to understand this better. If you look at any of the platforms that these companies use when it comes to coding round, right? Right at the right hand side top corner, students will have the option of selecting the programming language in which they're going to code. Almost all the platforms will allow students to code in C, C++, Java, and Python. These are the most popular language among our students. See, earlier it used to be between C and C++. Today, a lot of students are kind of finding Python to be better. Why Python is better? Obviously, it's very closer to the human language. It's a higher level language, and it's more intuitive also. So that's a language which is much easier to pick up, and the libraries is also very good. So kind of people who are beginning to learn programming, if they have not kind of got exposed to any of the other languages, Python is a good language to pick. But if you already learned C++ in your first year, second year, that can also be a very good language. See, ultimately the language does not matter. What matters is your understanding of it. And all companies will allow students to program in any language of their choice, right? So a student has to be strong in all these 5 areas. Now, one other common mistake that students do when it comes to preparation is students kind of learn them as theory or as concepts, right? But they never practice these questions. So it's very important for students to learn implementation of these questions. So I'll have to run, I'll have to take questions, I'll have to solve them. And see, basically, whether I have solved the question correctly or not is not evaluated by using one particular answer the way it gets evaluated in aptitude questions. But here what happens is there are a set of test cases which are given by the question paper setter. So test cases is, for example, I give you one particular value. What is the output that your program is kind of printing? And what should be the actual output? They compare it. If these two outputs match, then you have passed that test case. Now, unlike aptitude questions, it will not be a 0-1 kind of this thing, because what happens is there are like, see, the product companies do not typically have questions which have anywhere between 25 to 200 test cases, right? Just to check your solution, there are 250 test cases for one question, and each of these test cases will carry different marks, right? So your score for a particular question depends on how many test cases you have passed, right? So unless I really start practicing coding hands-on, I use a platform to see whether the test cases are passing or not. If the test cases are passing, how do I optimize my code? How do I debug, etc.? If I don't pick up these skills, right, I cannot move to the next level. See, at phase, when we train students on fundamentals of programming, we have a set of 160 questions. Any student who does our training program would have completed all the 160 questions. So just imagine he's doing 160 questions. Each question he's going to type his code hands-on. He's going to debug it. He's going to run it and ensure all the test cases are getting passed. Now, if he has that level of preparation, he will be confident when it comes to either appearing for an IT service company or even starting his preparation for the IT product company. Only when this is ready, student starts his next level of preparation, which is preparing for IT product companies. See, IT product companies, again, you're talking about two very important skills. See, it's ultimately the same programming, but you need to pick up two more skills, which are data structures and algorithms. So what are they? See, data structures is just ways in which you save data, right? Till fundamentals of programming, kind of students are saving data maximum as arrays. See, arrays is a contiguous data storage trick, right? Technique. So what happens is when you say I have an array with 1,000 elements, right? You can save an array with 1,000 elements only if your system or server, when you're doing your code compilation online, allows you memory to save 1,000 values. 1,000 values is very doable. But then if you look at your IT product companies, right, they give you constraints which runs into 10 power 9, 10 power 15 kind of cases, right? So you're not going to have so much continuous memory. So if continuous memory is not available, you cannot store the value as array. You'll have to now start looking for better ways of storing them. If it's linear data, you can still look at ways like linked list or stacks or queues to save them. But if it is not linear, then you'll have to know whether you're going to save it as trees or graphs, and how do you store them and retrieve them, right? So this is with reference to data which is getting stored and retrieved. But as far as IT service companies are concerned, maximum students are going to store data only in arrays. They'll not require anything better. But here the question complexity increases. So they need better ways to store data. That is where your data structures comes in, as simple as that. Now, next is algorithm. See, algorithm is again, when it comes to processing your data, etc., and getting to the result, there are a lot of established ways in which it happens. Now, some of these things commonly we know: recursion, backtracking, divide and conquer, etc. I'm not getting into them. These are the most common algorithmic techniques to find out solution to particular questions. And a lot of these algorithms are well established. For example, if you look at searching, right, there are 5 very popular algorithms for searching, and that's like kind of established. Most of the libraries will even support these algorithms. So students in a lot of cases might not even have to learn the complete algorithm for searching or sorting. But a question which is being asked by one of your IT product companies will never ask you directly to use one of these searching or sorting techniques. They will always modify the question slightly in such a way that you will have to apply your mind to understand which is a better fit. Or you might use the same search algorithm and you might have to modify it slightly. One of the questions that Amazon loves to ask is giving a set of numbers in an array and asking students to arrange the set of numbers in such a way that if the separation between these numbers are removed and it is considered as one string, that should be the largest value that can be performed. Now, this is very, very similar to sorting, just that you're not sorting the numbers in ascending order, but rather in an order in which when I add two numbers, right, in which order it will give me the larger value. For example, between let's say 9 and 30, if you're sorting it in the decreasing order, you'll put 30 first and 9 second. But then if I'm going to consider it as one number, right, it can be either 9 first and 30 next, which in which case it's 930, or 30 first and 9 next, in which case it's 309. So in this case, I'll have to put 9 first and 30 next. So I cannot directly use my sorting algorithm, but then the logic is the same. I just have to put them as A, B, and B as these two numbers and search them. So any student who understands sorting algorithm with a very, very small adjustment will be able to code this question, right? So this is where the number of algorithms the student has to learn is minimal, as long as he gets very strong in terms of hands-on implementation, one. And the second thing is he is able to kind of understand it completely and make suitable modifications, which is exactly what we do when it comes to training students, right? That's the reason why we do so much of hands-on training. See, the way you need to train your students when it comes to preparing for IT product companies is, please do not focus on theory. There has to be very, very minimal amount of theory, and a lot of questions should be practiced. Today, there are a lot of platforms like HackerRank, HackerEarth, etc., which provide students opportunity to practice. Now, there are a lot of benefits in practicing in platforms like that, which is one, it kind of helps you keep tab of how many questions you practiced. They've gamified the whole thing. So there are points that you gain. There are leaderboards on which you start getting ranked, and a lot of interview opportunities also open up for students who kind of hold good ranks on platforms such as HackerRank, HackerEarth, etc. So for such reasons, we normally strongly recommend doing a lot of practice on platforms like these. Right. Now, the next important thing is coding competitions. See, for a student who is currently moving into his final year, that's the 2022 batch, they're almost getting into final year. Now, it might be a little late to get into competitive coding. Probably, if you look at it, right, one or two good options for them would be, let's say, TCS Code Vita or Hack with Infi, or competitions where, yeah, they even have a good chance of landing a job. From that perspective, coding competitions will work. But coding competitions is something which kind of people should ideally get into right from their second year itself. No, see, coding competition, people look at it more like a sport, and people who kind of get into competitive coding get extremely involved in it, and over a period of time they improve their problem solving skills like crazy. See, in a lot of colleges, particularly when we're talking about the levels of IIT, NITs, etc., there you find students who get into competitive coding right from the second year. These kids start participating in a whole lot of competitions, right? ICPC is the largest one that all of us are aware of. But other than that, you have so many other national and international competitions. See, year on year, you have at least one or two guys who kind of get placed even in Google from India through the competitions that Google conducts, right? So it's a very democratic hiring process that a lot of companies follow, because competitive coding, one, it helps students prepare and improve their programming skills. Two, it gives them opportunities to get placed in companies as well. Right. Now, one other very important thing that I would like to talk about when it comes to the training plan is company-specific preparation. See, members of the training and placement community understand that there are different recruiters and they have very specific ways in which they kind of ask questions in the placements. We've seen this in IT service companies, right? For example, TCS follows a very similar pattern over the years. Infosys follows a very, very similar pattern, right? Year on year, the pattern undergoes minor changes, but largely it remains the same. It's kind of the pattern is so much established that between years the pattern remains the same. There are even questions that repeat. There are even questions that repeat between colleges in the drives that they conduct. Now, a very similar thing happens when it comes to IT product companies also. So last year we did a lot of research on this. We formed a team of 12 members only to track patterns of IT product companies across colleges last year, right? We did a huge analysis of that, and there is so much of repetition in pattern, in types of questions, and even actual questions getting repeated between colleges. So a student, if you're going to, let's say, sit for a DSHA drive, and DSHA has questions that are of a particular type which are getting tested in other colleges. If a student does a little bit of preparation on the type of question and even the exact question, right, he carries so much of advantage when he walks into a recruitment drive conducted by DSHA. Now, finally, is where students should be preparing on interview preparation. There were certain very interesting basic questions which Vijay had shared. So students should definitely be able to answer questions like that, face whiteboard or code share interviews, etc. Now, that again is a very important preparation which is required. But then it's also important to remember a student is going to get into the interview room only if he is very strong when it comes to his coding skills, which has to be the higher focus. So typically, what should be the timelines that you should be looking at when it comes to getting students to prepare for these skills? Ideally, students who are looking at getting placed in IT product companies by now should have done their fundamentals of programming training, and they should have practiced a good number of questions and be able to solve questions in any of the 5 areas that we discussed. Data structures and algorithms. So the first thing is you kind of students have to be taught about the basics of data structures algorithms in a hands-on manner, right? No point in teaching theory. So we kind of do something called as code along, right? When one of our trainers handles the classes, all the other students will code along with the trainer, so that whatever question is being implemented, the trainer is not implementing alone, but rather students also implement it side by side, and they get familiar with it, right? So please use a code along approach when it comes to training people on data structures and algorithms. And ideally, you should look at completing data structures algorithms training between now and May, right? So that students will have at least a couple of months, April, May, June, to practice for the whatever questions and different types of questions that happen in terms of building a HackerRank profile. See, ideally for the 2022 batch, they do not have sufficient time when it comes to building HackerRank profile or coding competitions, right? Because it's a little late in the day. I think what would be good for them is complete. If you've already done data structures and algorithms basic training, then you can focus on practicing and building profile. But if that is not done, then I think you should focus on first completing the training as early as possible, and then getting students to practice a lot of questions, right? So building profile coding competitions are things that you may have time to do or you may not have time to do. But company specific preparation, for reasons that we just spoke about, is something that students have to do. Last year, we clearly observed that campuses which do company specific training for IT product companies had a significant advantage to campuses which did not do this thing. See, again, the reason is very simple. Our understanding about what IT product companies test is very limited compared to what IT services companies test. So that is, we are better prepared for IT services companies, but IT product companies also, there is a type of repetition, just that the type of repetition, type of questions are different, but definitely it helps. And just before the interviews is where students should kind of prepare specifically for interviews. And here it is very important for students to do 2 or 3 rounds of mock interviews, particularly whiteboard interviews or code share interviews, which students would not have got exposed to. Because on the spot, in the heat of the moment, it's going to be very, very difficult for students to share their screen, code, and explain it to the interviewers, right? So 2-3 rounds of mock interviews is a must, right? So coming to the end of my presentation. So depending on where you are today, I would strongly suggest conducting a diagnostic test for students to understand where they stand today and start planning for a for their able to understand that students broadly fall under 3 categories. The first category of students who are good in fundamentals of programming. They kind of understand it well and they're able to solve most of the questions in a hands-on manner. So they are people who have a higher chance of getting placed in product companies if they are guided and trained for the same. You should start data structures and algorithms training for that category of students. The second category is students who understand basics of fundamentals of programming, but then they're not able to solve questions, right? They're good in theory, they can solve the MCQ questions, but they're not able to do the programming questions. For such students, you will have to plan a practice kind of an exercise or even guided practice, because when they do hands-on coding, right, a lot of students run into issues. They're not sure how to debug questions, they're not sure how to kind of solve problems in the right way, etc. So probably some kind of a guided practice might help them. And ultimately for students who are kind of lacking even in basic fundamentals of programming understanding, you'll have to plan for training them on fundamentals of programming in a hands-on manner, so they'll have some chance of getting placed in IT service companies. Now, if this is not done, then even the chances of getting placed in IT service companies could differ, right? Yeah, probably I would also like to kind of tell you this. We have a lot of diagnostic tests and we help a lot of colleges plan for their training and conduct diagnostic tests to understand where their students do. We offer this as a complimentary service. So in case you need help in terms of conducting a diagnostic test or understanding where your students stand and help plan your training calendar, etc., we'll be very happy to help you with the test and the report, right? And of course, like what I said, we can do this as a complimentary service. Yes. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. You can type them in the questions window.
Thank you, Karthik, for giving us a great overview of planning the training calendar for the IT product company recruitment. I request all the audiences who are here to please share any comments, questions in the questions pane, and we'll be happy to take them up. Okay, I have a question from Mr. Ravi. How much time would it take to handle algorithms training? Karthik, would you like to answer this?
Sure, Jake. Depending on where students start today, right? Uh, Data success algorithms training can happen anywhere between 6 to 12 days. So students understand slightly advanced concepts like dynamic programming, recursion, etc. Then you might be able to do the training in just about 6 days. But if students are not exposed to those areas, you might have to do it for 12 days. Probably a diagnostic test is something which will help you assess where they stand and accordingly plan. But rough window could be 6 to 12 days.
All right, thank you, Karthik. I have another question from Mr. Shashi. Will Face bring more companies like Yellow Messenger? Sir, thank you for your question. Last year, Yellow Messenger approached us, and we were able to, conduct the recruitment process for them, and we reached out to most campuses in our reach. We also did some recruitment for ThoughtWorks, and we are doing some training for them as well. While we are not able to commit anything, we are always on the reach out for companies and how we could help them with both recruitment and onboarding training. So we hope that we are able to bring more companies to our network institutions, and generally pan India, so that we can find the best talent for our corporate partners. So while I may not be able to commit any names or company profiles, uh, I'm sure of at least bringing a few companies this placement season for the 2022 batch. Any other questions? Okay, I have a question from Mr. Samir. What could be a detailed plan for 4 years of engineering students to get to the highest package? I'll probably take this question. Now, to let's say if a very high package and a large number of such offers is your aim, then we'll have to look at an institutional integrated kind of a training plan, and that plan would involve credit courses as well. So if there is some leeway for your institution to look at credit courses where the training goes into the mark sheet, then we have, some of the colleges that we work with have piloted this and have seen some success. And they start right from the first year, and they have a detailed plan for even the vacations, wherein if a student is able to land an internship in the vacation for in the second year, that is treated as a credit. If they are not able to land an internship in the second year vacation, they are supposed to choose one of few tracks, let's say 5 tracks of what they're calling it summer school. So a summer school program can potentially prepare students in one area, 80 to 90 hours of training provided by, followed by assessments. And students use this. Let's say if I'm a student who's not able to secure an internship, at least I'm doing this summer school thing where I'm learning something, as I'm being assessed in something, and I'm opening myself up in terms of horizons, and I'm able to add some things to my profile, my resume. So rather than my resume being empty and me trying to fill it all in the final year, I do it gradually, and sometimes that is all the inspiration that is required to get the student to move and start acquiring more skills and start layering them up all the way to securing that higher package. So an integrated training approach is what we highly recommend. So foundations of programming happen much earlier in the day, and a different track is followed for CSIT departments versus core departments. So within core department, that is non-computer science IT departments, if they also want to aspire to get into IT product jobs, we have seen some institutions do that and prove that it's possible. And we've been part of their training setup as well. So it is quite possible, Mr. Samir, if I can probably share an email privately with a detailed plan, and we can take this up in a separate conversation. I'll take this next question from Ms. Disha. How much time does it take to help students with FOP, foundations of programming? Karthik, if you can please take this.
Sure. I think, see, I'm assuming that these are students who might have gone through basic programming in some language, because a lot of university students learn this in the first and second semester. But then the problem is, by the time they come to the seventh semester, they've forgotten most of the skills or whatever they would have learned. So if students have some retained understanding, then probably it might take about 4-5 days to kind of train them up. Now, on the other side, we found a lot of computer science students who have gone through the basics. They've just not done hands-on training. So for such students, it might take about 3 to 4 days, right? Where we only focus on hands-on programming, where like we spoke about that 160 odd questions, right? So on a daily basis, our trainer goes there, guides them to solve all the 160 questions. So at the end of the 4-day process, the student is very, very good at that. But then if you have students who have kind of not gone through the basics, etc., they might need about 7 to 10 days, very roughly.
Thank you, Karthik. I'll take the next question from Mr. Vijay. So the question is on what are the areas of jobs outside of just programming, like AWS? So that's an excellent question. In fact, you have answered it yourself. I'm sorry, ma'am, you've answered it yourself. The As you have yourself pointed out, AWS and AWS related spaces have a lot of employment opportunities. So if a student is skilled in working with AWS, he or she can potentially land a job, maybe even outside of campus recruitment. Similarly, there are different profiles like Salesforce skills. If a student is acquired Salesforce skills, he or she can find work in Salesforce. Automation, robotic process automation, very specifically automation anywhere is doing a lot of work in that, they can find it. Then there is Microsoft Azure. There is one. So if students can look at these opportunities and train themselves in that outside of programming, this may not require that high level of programming skills that we have so far spoken about, but it will still require analytical skills. If they can somehow complete a certification, do a few projects, I think that opens up a lot of opportunities. One thing that we have seen recently in a particular college is they helped all the non-core students pick up WordPress CMS skills. WordPress is a simple drag and drop kind of a website development software, and we didn't know that there were so many jobs out there for someone skilled with WordPress content management system. So mechanical engineers pick up WordPress skills, they are able to find a job through campus placements from companies which recruit for WordPress skills. So there is ecosystems of jobs, as we call it, in different kind of areas. So if you're able to spot them, train them, or even lead students to that direction, I think employment would not be as much of a problem. I'll take this next question from is the training enough for non-IT students, those who are willing to go for IT companies? I think Karthik, if you can take this.
Sure. Is a question about IT service companies or product companies?
So is C programming training
Right.
enough for non-IT students, those who are willing to go for IT companies?
That's sufficient, ma'am. Now, again, I would want to emphasize in terms of abilities, right? So you have fundamentals of programming, which is level 1, and then you have data structures and algorithms, which is level 2. But like what you have rightly asked, a lot of non-IT students would find data structures algorithms to be slightly advanced. So you can start with kind of training them on fundamentals of programming. C as a language is good enough to get them trained. If a student is good in C in fundamentals of programming in a hands-on manner, that is good enough for him to get an IT services job, ma'am.
All right, thank you, Karthik. All the other job aggregators, trying to find out which is a fake job and which is not. So all of these are tech literacy skills. Some awareness sessions could help. And if you are an institution who's looking to get on board with us in the program, we are happy to provide such training. Quick question from Mr. Samir. Are you providing offline training during such pandemic situation, especially in Maharashtra? So we are taking it on a case-by-case basis. I'm happy to connect with you privately and discuss this. So we are providing training both online and offline. I want to assure our clients of that. So we are not moving in a particular direction, fully. But as you can understand, there are some risks, some costs associated with operating in a physical setup, which involves a lot of travel. And because of that, we've put some processes in place so where we take care of our folks during these such travel and staying out and delivering offline programs in institutions. So I'm happy to connect with you privately, sir, and address your queries. All right. So we have come to the end of this session, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. We had a great time discussing things with you. We hope to follow this up with multiple more face pulse sessions, especially for TPOs and educational institutional leaders, including faculty, HODs, and principals. So please be on the lookout for an email or WhatsApp from FacePulse, and do share it with your faculty so that they can also join in and contribute or gain from these sessions. We hope to be also bringing in some external guests in the subsequent events. Thank you very much once again. Please take care and have a good weekend.
Thank you.